Hello, I'm Nigel Hicks and thank you for joining me on Nigel Hicks Photography. Today I'm going to talk about a software plugin called Dehancer which provides film emulations for your digital photography and videography. In other words, it allows you to make your digital stills and videos look as if they were shot on film. I was a little surprised when the people at Dehancer approached me asking me to do a review, but nevertheless I was quite intrigued, so here I am talking to you about it today. They're not expecting me necessarily to produce a glowing review, it's whatever I find or whatever my opinion is. And if you do like what you hear from this, you can get a copy of Dehancer with a 10% discount by using the discount coupon Nigel Hicks Photography, all one word, on their website. As you'll find when going through this review, I give a qualified thumbs up to Dehancer with a few reservations. So what about Dehancer? Well, it comes in several forms, firstly divided into video editing or stills editing, and what I'll be talking to you today about is purely stills editing. I'm not going to touch the video at all, just looking at stills. If you get the stills version for editing stills, then again it comes in different forms for using with Capture One or with Photoshop and Lightroom. So I'll be talking about the Photoshop Lightroom version. So whichever version of Dehancer you're going for, you can download it from dehancer.com. For the Photoshop version, it sets up very easily, and then once it's installed, you'll find it in the filters section of the Photoshop, not actually under the plugins listing, surprisingly, but under filters. So let's have a little look at what you'll find when you first dive into Dehancer. So when you want to launch Dehancer in Photoshop, first of all, you have to have an image open, and then you will go to click on Dehancer Film, as I say, in the filters section, and what will come up initially is a prompt to download updates of all the various film profiles that are available. And so once you've done that, then what you'll get is something like this, which is not actually greatly encouraging. You have your picture, but then also you have this great big watermark all over it. And the reason you've got that is because you haven't yet bought a license to actually use the software. So you can do all sorts of things with the software, but everything without the license. But unfortunately, all your images will have this watermark on them. So you will need to go back to dehancer.com and buy a license. After which you'll then be emailed the activation code, and then you will be able to activate your software and get rid of that watermark. So when you start that process, you'll get a screen like this where you've got two options: update film profiles, which you've already done, and then activate Dehancer on the right. So you click on that, and then you will get a screen that looks something like this, showing you that you've not yet activated your software. So to do that, you enter your email address here, and then you copy your activation code from your emails, and then you paste it into this little box here, and then you click Activate Plugin. And then when you've done that, you'll get a screen that looks something like this, which shows that you've activated it. You'll see on mine it says Promo. That's it, because it's given me a temporary license to run Dehancer to do this review. But you'll get a screen something like that. And once you've done that, then you'll be able to look at your images without that wretched watermark. So that's how you get started with Dehancer. Now we've got it downloaded and set up on the computer, we can start looking at some of the software's features. Okay, so we now have an image loaded in Photoshop. Let's go into Dehancer and see what we can do with it. So click on Filter and Dehancer Film, and away we go, hopefully. And there we are. So show the whole image. There we go, that's the image. And what we'll see first of all is, well, on the left we've got a whole load of film profiles, and we've got quite an assortment here of various colour and black and white films, and then also colour negative and colour positive, as in positive meaning sort of transparency slide films. In my experience, the first 15 years of my photography career were spent photographing using film, and all exclusively transparency slide film, and almost entirely Fujichrome Velvia, which you'll see this one listed on the left here, and also Fujichrome ProView 100 as well. So these two are sort of my default I'm going to use for this review. Really, these two films. There are plenty of others. The other two that I used at the beginning of my career, really, which I haven't used for a long time now, are down near the bottom, Kodak Exochrome, and then Kodak, where are we? Kodachrome here somewhere. There we go. Kodachrome is there, like that. And you can see if you click on different ones, then you get different sort of results with the colour balance. Now, if you want to reduce this list, it's quite a long list of different films. You can click up here on where it says all films, to get a drop down menu, and just pick out the ones you want to keep. So we're going to keep a colour positive, that's the transparency film. So that's now going to just reduce the list enormously. Now over on the right, we have a whole series of things that you can do to change the emulation. So it's not a strict single emulation of a particular film. You can actually then do quite a different variety of things, starting with changing the exposure. You can change the colour temperature as well, both on the yellow-blue scale and on the magenta-green scale. So actually it's not necessarily strictly adhering to the actual emulation for a particular film. You can change it if you want. And a film developer is emulating what you might do to change colour balance if you change the mixture of the colour developer when you're producing, or the film developer I should say, when you're actually producing using film. Film compression is something where a film behaves rather differently from digital when we're at the extremes of exposure, where you have very dark shadows and bright highlights. The relationship between exposure and burning out, so all going completely black, with digital is completely linear, whereas with film it's not entirely. It's a slight S curve, meaning that when you're in deep shadows, the film will actually hold on to details in deep shadows rather longer than digital does. And similarly in highlights, when you're in bright highlights, the film will hold on to details in the highlights longer than digital does. And so with this film compression system you have here, you can emulate that with the digital in your digital images. Expanding is just enabling you to prevent burnout or black areas at either end of the histogram. So you've got the image histogram at the bottom here, and you can change the black point on the left by moving this around. You can see that shifts around there. So if you've got things moving around, if you've got problems keeping all the shadows in on the left, then you can move it, and on the right you can move the white point to actually make sure you got all the highlights in your picture. And next is print emulation. So it emulates what the image might look like if it were printed out. So it's not just looking at prints or images as a negative or as a colour transparency, but also if it were printed out, which is not actually printing, of course, it's just staying on the screen, but it's an emulation of what it might look like if it were printed. Colour head is mixes of different colour of light in larger if you were actually printing a picture out from a negative or a transparency. Then we come to film grain, and this is really the biggie for me. This has always been the big block I have with film emulation. It's great. It's one thing being able to emulate the colour changes which you get with film. That's actually not a bad idea sometimes. But to deliberately put grain into a picture, this is where I really struggle, because obviously grain represents loss of resolution, loss of colour quality as well very often. But the great thing with Dehancer is they've separated the two emulation processes really. The colour emulation, which is over here, we emulate the colour of different films, and then the grain, so you don't have to have both. You can have the colour without having the grain, which I think is great. Halation is an effect that you have with film on high contrast edges, particularly when you've got artificial lighting. You get some sort of orange blue on the orange blue spectrum, highlighting along these high contrast edges where you've got artificial lighting. Bloom is something similar, but it's usually high contrast where you've got white, not so much artificial lighting. Well, it can be artificial lighting, but also in natural light as well. So you have this blooming of the white halo growing out from your subject. Film damage, where you can actually even insert the film marks on your images if you want to. Obviously, a lot of these things, you're not going to do all these all the time. So that's a brief overview of the features of Dehancer. Now I'm going to look through what you can do with a number of images using those features. First of all, what kinds of files can we use in Dehancer? Well, what they recommend is that you need to use 16-bit TIFFs. And obviously, if you use TIFF files, that's absolutely fine. And if you can actually load 8-bit TIFF files into Dehancer, but it will export those images afterwards as 16-bit. So you might as well start with 16-bit files as TIFFs. The other thing they recommend, which I really run into trouble with Dehancer, is the fact that they want you to use your images in sRGB color profile. That I'm sure that a lot of people are perfectly happy working in sRGB, but as a professional photographer working largely in publishing and supplying images to picture libraries, etc., my entire workflow is in Adobe RGB, which is obviously a profile with a wider color gamut than sRGB. And so to switch to sRGB would be, well, I'm not going to do it simply for the sake of Dehancer. So have a little bit of an issue there with Dehancer on this. It needs to be able to work in Adobe RGB. Now their paperwork says that they are working on compliance with other color profiles, so hopefully that will come soon. However, in this review, what I have done anyway is I've made comparisons between identical images which are in sRGB and Adobe RGB, and we'll come to that in a moment. So let's just look at a few images, as I say, and I'm going to start with this rather nice warm tropical sunsets. Obviously it's quite rich in reds, something that films like the Fujichrome film, especially Velvia, were well known for giving nice warm colours, especially in evening light. So let's see how this works. At the moment we're looking at the profile that we had with Kodachrome, which I used at the beginning of my career, and it was not really a happy experience, I have to say, but not for landscape photography. And if you go up on the top right here, you've got this eye here, which is so you can toggle between showing the effect of the film profile and also switching it off. So let's turn it off for a moment. That's my original image before coming into Dehancer, and that's with Kodachrome installed. Must admit, not very impressive, which is how I felt about Kodachrome at the time many years ago. A little bit of a magenta cast, which is really not great for landscape photography. If we switch to Velvia 50, Fujichrome Velvia 50, so that's my original image. And there you see with colour emulation, it's rather warmer than Kodachrome. Let's go back to Kodachrome again. So that's Kodachrome, and that's Velvia 50, which is actually rather more attractive film. If you scroll up a little bit, and we can look at Provia 100. Again, that's a slightly bluer version than Velvia. So you can see there are real changes here going on from one film profile to another. How accurate these are to actually what the films were producing, or do produce, I should say, is another matter. But perhaps that doesn't really matter. We just really want to get some sort of approximation of how well these profiles perform. At the bottom, of course, we have the histogram. You can see how it changes from one emulation to another, and it changes quite a bit. And obviously, as I showed you just now, if we go back to the top over here, we can change this. We can change it to change the color compensation if we want to change that. We can make it warmer. Same with Velvia, it makes a much warmer image if we turn the color temperature up. If we move down, I won't look at film compression or the developer. So obviously with the histogram, if you can move the black point if we need to. I don't think we're quite some way out there. Let's move it. Let's move the black point further towards the left-hand end, so our shadows are a bit richer. And the white point, I think we'll leave the white point where it is at the right-hand end here of the histogram. And let's go on down. We're not going to emulate printing, we're not going to emulate a colour head either. Now let's look at film grain, which we have over here. We'll just tick the box to turn it on. hopefully. There we go, tick the boxes on. And what we've got coming up is a 35mm 50 ISO as our default. That's fine for 50 ISO, that's what Fujichrome Velvia is. We've got a list of various other options that we could put in if we wanted to, but we'll stick with a 35mm 50 ISO option. And you can't really see it that much on the screen at the moment. It's a little bit visible there. If we zoom in, keep on zooming in, there we go. Now you can really see the grain. If we toggle off and on, that's our original fine digital image, and that's with the grain installed. And when I first saw this on Dehancer, it really gave me the shivers, because this was just so much like the real film grain from film that it was quite a shock to see it look quite so accurate. And really, would you really want to do this to your digital images? I mean, we spend an awful lot of money on really good lenses and so on, which give us nice, crisp, sharp images, and then we go and ruin it all by putting this grain in, which just makes it really reduces the resolution and also the color quality. So let's look back there. That's the original digital file. That's with the film grain in. And I'm just like, oh, would I really want to do that? Not really, personally. That's my personal view. Anyway, so let's turn off the film grain. Once you're happy with your image, then you can just click on OK, and that will export your image. I'm going to export it as a Fujichrome Velvia 50 emulation, and then we can export it by clicking OK. And now we have our final image, which is looking really very nice and warm. If I click on undo, that will undo the Dehancer film, and you can see that's the original image. Now we do. Okay, so that's the image with Dehancer. That's the image without Dehancer. So you can see quite a nice difference there. And although the original image looks quite nice with the sunset, with the Dehancer, it's even warmer. That's the Dehancer, obviously, with Fujichrome Velvia 50 emulation. So let's just have a quick look at an image taken at a very different time of day, when the sun is high. There's much more blue light available than that sunset image, and you can see that with our Fujichrome Velvia, if we toggle on, off and on, let's turn it off. That's the original digital file, and that's with Velvia. You see it's rather warmer, a little bit redder. That sand is a little less bright. So that's the Velvia. That's what Velvia looks like on this. And if you go to Kodachrome, see rather magenta hue, which is not great for landscape photography. That's the original digital file. That's with Kodachrome. It's not really ideal. And then Ektachrome is a little bit better. It's rather bluer, actually. There's no magenta cast, but it is rather bluer than Velvia 50. That's the original digital image. That's with Ektachrome, and so on and so forth. So, and one other we'll look at is Provia 100, which again is a little warmer than Ektachrome or Kodachrome. That's the original digital file. That's with Provia 100, definitely rather warmer. And then Velvia, come back to Velvia 50. That's the Velvia 50 effect. That's the original digital file, and that's the Velvia 50. So a little bit warmer, but not such big changes as you get with the image shot at sunset, which is kind of what you expect with film, actually. Now we're going to take a look at something rather different. This is an image taken obviously at night, artificial lighting in Shanghai, and just going to show you what happens with halation. If you look at halation, you see, switch the halation on. We're going to emulate it for 35mm film, and you can see it's quite a big change in the colour. That's with it off, and that's with on. You see quite a bit of halation around the edges, around the bright edges of the. That's with it off. That's with it on. And if we zoom in a little bit, you can see a little bit more clearly, hopefully. So that's with it on. That's with it off. It actually makes quite a bit of difference to the quality of the image, as you can see. You see it really softens the edges, and you get this halo around the edges, which makes it much softer, which is may or may not be attractive. It's entirely up to you what you feel. So let's turn the halation off, and then we look at bloom and see what we get with the white, with those white lights. See, a little bit similar to the halation, but not quite the same thing. We haven't talked about black and white photography yet, so let's have a quick look at how Dehancer handles conversion of colour images to black and white. Let's take a quick look. What we need to do first is call up black and white films from this list. And we can see we've got a number here. So let's look at Fujifilm Neopan first, the top right. So that's quite a nice little conversion. I think that's quite effective. Let's go down and Ilford HP5 plus 400. This is a film I used to use a fair old bit in days gone by, mostly when I was a student actually. So to compare those two black and whites, that was a little bit higher contrast than the HP5. Kodak Eastman is obviously fairly well known, was fairly widely used. I don't know if it still is. And then becomes the Kodak Plus X Pan, which again is a little bit softer than the Eastman. And then we come down to the bottom. We've got one here by Rolei, which is, wow, look at that. I mean, that is very high contrast. So if we compare that to the Eastman, yeah, there's actually a lot less detail visible as well because it is such high contrast. So we compare it with the Ilford HP5, and there we are. So it's actually gives us various options for converting colour images to black and white, and that could actually be quite a useful little tool simply for conversion of images to black, or colour images to black and white. Okay, so we're going to come back now to this beautiful tropical sunset picture, and we're going to make a comparison between sRGB and Adobe RGB images in this. So what I've got loaded here at the moment is the sRGB, same sRGB image that I showed you earlier. We're going to just do a little quick conversion here. So we've got Fujichrome Velvia, and this is with it installed, and that's without, and that's with. So I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to export that as it is, and now that's our sRGB image with Fujichrome Velvia 50 emulation installed. I'm going to save that as, what am I going to save it as? Save it as, so sRGB, and we'll put Velvia on it. So we now have that image as our saved image. So we can compare that now with an Adobe RGB image, given the same treatment. So let's just quickly go into and call up our Adobe RGB image. So that's our Adobe RGB image. It's looking pretty good as well. Let's launch it in Dehancer. So go to Filter, Dehancer Film, and now away we go. Hopefully, there it is. Let's get that to fit in the window properly. And now we have Fujichrome Velvia 50 emulation. Turn it off. That's the original image. That's with the emulation, and we're going to keep it. We'll just export it straight away, and then we'll save it as file. Save as. We'll go with Adobe RGB Velvia. So there we are. So that's an Adobe RGB image with Velvia 50 emulation, and then we click on over here. We then go to the same image. This is the sRGB with Velvia emulation. We go and you can see there's very little difference between the two. Adobe RGB perhaps is slightly richer. And if we look at the histogram up on top right over here, there's not a lot of difference between them. See, it's slightly wider. The sRGB image has a slightly wider histogram than with the Adobe RGB, and that's the only difference in it. But it works quite well. So although Dehancer's paperwork says that you should use only sRGB images, it does work perfectly well, it would seem to me, with Adobe RGB images as well, so that's encouraging. And I have actually also tried this out with several other images, and it works just as well with those as well, not just this image taken at sunset. That's about it really for this sort of whistle-stop tour of Dehancer. A qualified thumbs up for me. There's a couple of issues. Obviously the main one for me is the fact that Dehancer claim that you can't really use Adobe RGB images, only sRGB, but my own experiments seem to suggest that you can use Adobe RGB images just fine. Another issue I have is something I've not actually mentioned up to now, and that is the fact there is no option for bulk processing of multiple images with the same settings simultaneously. You can put in presets, but you still have to process each image individually. So there's no bulk processing, which is fine if you've just got a handful of images to do. But if you've got a project where you've got maybe 100 images or so that you want to give the same appearance to, then I think you've got a little bit of an issue here, and I think perhaps Dehancer ought to look at putting in some bulk processing. Apart from that, I think it's actually quite a useful thing to do if you do want to put in film emulations. Also, it's quite a good way really of just converting colour images to black and white. So yeah, I would personally stay massively away from putting in film grains. I really wouldn't go the whole hog of emulating film, because I would like to have my images nice and sharp and good colour quality. I don't want the resolution ruined by all this grain. We spend a lot of money trying to get to the point where we have very nicely sharp images. I really wouldn't want them to ruin it with grain. But in terms of the colour emulation and the colour corrections we can have using Dehancer, putting in film emulations, I think it's actually pretty useful if you've got a project which requires, or it looks better if you have in these film emulations. So I think that's about it for me. Again, if you want to buy Dehancer, then you can get a 10% discount if you use the coupon code Nigel Hicks Photography, all one word, when you get to checkout, and that'll be great. Thank you very much.